His lawyer leaned in and whispered a few quiet words. And in that instant, Daniel Brooks' confident smile disappeared. The color drained from his face. His fingers tightened around the pen he had been so eager to use just seconds earlier. The documents in front of him, the ones that were supposed to secure his victory, suddenly felt heavier. Across the room, Lena Carter watched him, and for the first time in years, she allowed herself to smile, because Daniel had just realized the truth. He hadn't won everything. He had just taken everything that would destroy him. From the outside, their life looked perfect. The house stood at the end of a quiet street in an upscale suburban neighborhood, the kind of place where everything was trimmed, polished, and carefully maintained. Wide windows reflected the morning sun. A black car sat neatly in the driveway. Inside, every room was staged like a magazine spread. It was the kind of life people admired, and the kind of life that hid the truth best. Lena Carter had lived in that house for over a decade, 15 years of marriage. 15 years of building something that, at least on the surface, seemed unbreakable. She met Daniel Brooks when she was still young, driven, practical, and determined to build a future that felt secure. Daniel had been different back then, ambitious, charming, the kind of man who spoke about the future like it was already his. He didn't just dream, he promised. And Lena believed him. In the early years, everything felt like progress. Small wins turned into bigger ones. A modest start slowly grew into something that resembled success. Daniel's business began to expand, one project at a time. But behind every contract signed, every deal closed, every celebration shared, there was Lena. She handled the numbers, the schedules, the clients, the problems no one else saw. While Daniel stood in front of people, speaking confidently about growth and vision, Lena stayed behind the scenes, making sure everything actually worked. She didn't need recognition. At least that's what she told herself. Their son, Ethan, came into their lives not long after, and from that moment on, Lena's world became even fuller, balancing motherhood with responsibilities that quietly multiplied. Days blurred into years, and somewhere along the way, something changed. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. At first, it was small things. Daniel started coming home later than usual. Meetings ran longer. Calls became more private. His phone was always within reach, always turned slightly away. Then came the tone, shorter conversations. Less patience. A subtle shift in the way he looked at her, as if she were no longer part of the same world he was building. Criticism followed soon after. The meals weren't right. The house wasn't organized enough. She wasn't keeping up. And the one that stayed with her the longest? You don't really have ambition anymore. Lena had said nothing, because arguing would have changed nothing. Because deep down, she already felt it. The distance, the quiet unraveling of something that had once felt solid. Still, she stayed. Not because she didn't see it, but because she understood something Daniel didn't. Real life wasn't built on moments. It was built on patterns, and patterns always revealed the truth eventually. One night, long after the house had gone quiet, Lena sat alone at the dining table. The soft glow of a lamp lit the stack of documents in front of her. Numbers, statements, records that had become routine for her to review. It was nothing unusual, until it was. A transaction caught her eye, then another, something small, easy to overlook, the kind of detail most people would ignore. But Lena had never been most people. She leaned closer, followed the numbers, checked the dates, and then she paused. Because the pattern didn't make sense. Money was moving in ways it shouldn't, not randomly. Deliberately, a slow, quiet flow slipping out of places it was supposed to stay. Lena didn't panic. She didn't react. She simply turned the page and kept going. Minutes turned into hours. The deeper she looked, the clearer it became. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't bad luck. It was something else entirely. Something hidden, something intentional. By the time the clock passed midnight, Lena leaned back in her chair, her hands resting lightly on the table. The house around her was silent, peaceful, unaware. But everything had already changed, because in that moment, Lena Carter understood something that would reshape everything that came after. The life she had been helping build for years wasn't what it seemed, and whatever Daniel Brooks believed he owned was built on something far more fragile than he could ever imagine. Lena didn't confront him, not that night, not the next morning, not even a week later. Instead, she did what she had always done best. She watched. At first glance, nothing about Daniel Brooks had changed. He still left the house at the same time every morning, dressed in tailored suits that fit him just a little too well. He still carried himself with that quiet confidence people trusted instantly. He still spoke about his business with certainty, as if every decision he made was part of a larger, flawless plan. But Lena had stopped listening to what he said. She started paying attention to what he didn't. The late nights became more frequent. At first, it was once a week, then twice, then almost every evening. "There's a lot going on right now," Daniel would say casually, loosening his tie as he walked through the door long after dinner had gone cold. "Expansion takes time?" Lena would nod. She never asked for details, because details were where lies tended to break. And Daniel had become very careful. He kept his phone closer now, always face down on the table, always within reach. Notifications silenced, messages checked quickly, almost instinctively, like someone who didn't want to be caught reacting. Once, Lena entered the room quietly while he was sitting on the couch. For a fraction of a second, he flinched. It was subtle, almost invisible, but Lena noticed. She always noticed. Then there were the calls. Short, quiet, taken in another room. The tone of his voice during those calls was different. Softer, measured, almost attentive in a way Lena hadn't heard in years. That, more than anything else, told her everything she needed to know. But she still said nothing, because this wasn't about emotion anymore. It was about information. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly, Daniel began to change in ways he didn't even realize were visible. He stopped asking about Ethan's day, stopped noticing the small details that once mattered. Dinner became optional for him. Conversations became brief. Eye contact became rare. And when he did look at Lena, it felt like he was looking through her, as if she were no longer part of the life he was building. One evening, he sat across from her at the table, scrolling through something on his phone. "You've been distracted lately," he said without looking up. Lena paused. It was almost ironic. "I've just been busy," she replied calmly. Daniel let out a quiet breath, finally setting his phone down. "Well, try not to fall behind," he said. "Things are moving fast right now." There it was. That tone again. Not concern, not partnership, assessment. Like she was an employee who wasn't performing. Lena met his eyes for a moment. "Of course," she said. And just like that, the conversation ended. But something inside her shifted. Not painfully, not dramatically, just clearly. That night, after Daniel went upstairs, Lena remained in the kitchen. The same table, the same documents. But now, she wasn't just reviewing numbers. She was building a pattern. Every transaction she had seen before, she revisited. Every account, she tracked. Every gap, she filled. What had seemed like scattered irregularities before was now beginning to align into something structured. Intentional. Precise. Daniel hadn't been careless. He had been hiding something, and he had done it well, just not well enough. Lena began documenting everything. Quietly, carefully, she made copies of records that no one else thought to check. Stored them away in places Daniel would never think to look. Created layers of distance between what she knew and what he believed she knew. Because the moment he realized, everything would change, and Lena wasn't ready for that yet. Not until she understood all of it. Weeks turned into months, and while Daniel's world seemed to expand outward, more meetings, more expenses, more confidence, Lena's world narrowed into focus. She noticed patterns in his behavior that matched the financial movements she had uncovered. Days when money moved. Daniel stayed out later. Large transfers, followed by sudden mood swings. Moments of tension, hidden behind forced confidence. It was all connected. Every piece, every decision, every lie. One night, as Lena sat alone once again, she reached the end of a trail she had been following for weeks. A final transfer. A destination she hadn't seen before. She opened the file slowly. Read the numbers once, then again. And this time, she didn't lean back. She didn't pause. She didn't need to. Because now, she understood. Not just that something was wrong, but how wrong it really was. The life Daniel was so proud of. The success he carried like armor. The future he spoke about like it was guaranteed. None of it was stable. None of it was real. It was built on something fragile, something temporary, something that could collapse. All at once, Lena closed the file gently. Her expression didn't change, but her decision did. She wasn't going to confront him. She wasn't going to warn him. And she definitely wasn't going to stop him. Because for the first time, Lena Carter realized something that changed everything. Daniel Brooks wasn't building a future. He was digging a hole. And if she was patient enough, he would eventually ask to take it all for himself. The night everything became clear didn't feel dramatic. There was no argument, no confrontation, no moment that demanded attention. Just silence, the kind of silence that settles deep into a house long after everyone else has gone to sleep. Lena sat alone at the dining table again, a single lamp casting a soft circle of light over the documents in front of her. The rest of the room faded into shadow, untouched. Still, Daniel wasn't home. He hadn't been home much lately. But tonight, that didn't matter, because Lena wasn't waiting for him anymore. She was following something far more important. The numbers. At first, it had been curiosity, a few inconsistencies. Transfers that didn't match their usual structure. Accounts that seemed misplaced. Now, it was something else, a pattern. And patterns, once they revealed themselves, didn't lie. Lena moved slowly, methodically. Every page she turned connected to another. Every transaction led somewhere. Every detail, no matter how small, carried weight. She traced the flow of money the way someone might trace footsteps in the dark, careful not to miss anything. And then she found it. An account she didn't recognize, not in their primary records, not in their usual reports. It sat just outside the system Daniel had always shown her, quiet and hidden behind layers that would have been easy to overlook. But Lena didn't overlook things. She opened the file. The numbers appeared simple at first glance. Transfers in, transfers out. Regular enough to seem routine. But when she looked closer, her hand paused. The amounts didn't make sense. Large sums moved in, only to disappear again within days. Not reinvested, not accounted for in any project she knew, not reflected in any asset tied to the business. They were vanishing. Lena leaned forward slightly and kept digging. One account became two. Two became four. Each one connected in a way that formed a quiet, hidden network. Money moving in loops, shifting between places it didn't belong, settling nowhere for long. It wasn't growth. It wasn't strategy. It was something else entirely. Something unstable. Something dangerous. She pulled another document closer, then another. The house. For years, Lena had believed it was secure. One of the few things that symbolized everything they had built. Solid, valuable, owned. But the paperwork told a different story. The original loan, she expected that. The second, her eyes narrowed slightly. The third. Lena stopped. For a long moment, she didn't move. 3 separate loans tied to the same property. Stacked. Layered. Each one pulling more value out than the house could realistically hold. She did the math in her head, then checked it again. The result didn't change. They didn't own the house. The house owned them. Lena exhaled slowly. But she didn't react. Not yet. Because she wasn't finished. The business came next. The part Daniel spoke about with the most pride. The part everyone admired. The the part that made everything else seem believable. Lena opened the financial summaries. Lines of credit maxed. Outstanding payments delayed. Obligations stacked across timelines that didn't align with incoming revenue. And beneath all of it, a quiet accumulation of debt that had been building for years, hidden behind movement, masked by confidence, ignored by anyone who didn't look closely enough. But Lena looked closely, and what she saw wasn't success, it was imbalance, severe, growing, unavoidable. She sat back slightly, her gaze lowering to the table as the full picture began to settle into place. House, business, accounts, everything connected, everything strained, everything fragile. But one question remained. Where had it all gone? Because debt like this didn't appear without a reason. It didn't grow without direction. So Lena kept going. Further this time, past the business, past the structure Daniel had built, into places he never expected anyone to follow. The transactions changed, different patterns, different purposes. And then she found the answer. Investments that had failed. Money placed into things that never returned. Losses hidden behind new borrowing. Then something else. Expenses that didn't belong to the business. Not even close. Private. Personal. Unexplained. And finally, a payment stream tied to something that made Lena go completely still. A separate living space funded quietly. Maintained consistently. Unknown to her. The silence in the room deepened. Not because anything had changed, but because everything had. Lena didn't feel shock. Not in the way most people would. She didn't panic. She didn't break. Because by now, the pattern had already prepared her. Instead, she reached for a blank sheet of paper and began writing. Numbers first, then totals, then comparisons. She worked through everything with calm precision, adding, subtracting, verifying, until there was nothing left to question. When she finished, Lena looked down at the final result, then read it again. The truth wasn't complicated. It didn't need to be. It was simple, clear, and impossible to ignore. The life Daniel believed he had built wasn't real. It was a structure held together by debt, a carefully maintained illusion supported by borrowed time and borrowed money. And beneath it all, nothing solid remained. Lena placed the pen down gently. The sound was soft, final, because in that moment, something shifted inside her. Not emotionally, but strategically. This wasn't a problem she needed to fix. It wasn't a mistake she needed to confront. It was something else, something far more useful. Lena Carter now understood exactly what Daniel Brooks had built. And more importantly, what he didn't realize he was about to lose. Or rather, what he would soon fight to keep. Lena didn't sleep that night. Not because she was overwhelmed, not because she was afraid, but because her mind was clear. Clear in a way it hadn't been in years. By the time the first light of morning slipped through the windows, the documents were already organized into neat stacks. Numbers had been verified, patterns confirmed, conclusions drawn. There was nothing left to question. Only one thing left to decide: what to do with the truth. Most people in her position would have confronted him, demanded answers, started a fight. But Lena Carter wasn't most people. She understood something Daniel never had. The moment you reveal what you know, you lose your advantage. And Lena had no intention of losing anything ever again. So instead of reacting, she prepared. That same morning, when Daniel walked into the kitchen, adjusting his cufflinks as if the world was exactly the way he wanted it to be, Lena greeted him the way she always did. Calm, predictable, invisible. "Coffee?" she asked. Daniel gave a short nod, barely looking at her. "Busy day," he said. "I might be late." "Of course," Lena replied. No tension, no suspicion, no change. And that was exactly the point. Because from that moment on, Lena began building something Daniel would never see coming. The first step was distance, not physical, financial. She reviewed every account that legally belonged to her, everything that existed outside the structure Daniel controlled. Money she had earned before the business grew. Funds that had never been merged. Assets that on paper were hers alone. It wasn't a large fortune, but it was enough. Enough to protect, enough to build from, enough to survive. Lena didn't move it all at once. That would have been obvious. Instead, she made small, careful decisions over time. Adjustments that looked ordinary, transfers that followed logic. Nothing sudden, nothing suspicious, just quiet separation. The second step was protection. If Daniel's world collapsed, and Lena now knew it would, she needed to make sure one thing remained untouched. Ethan, her son, had grown up believing in stability, believing in the life around him, believing in his father, and Lena refused to let that collapse take him down with it. So she reached out to someone she trusted, someone far removed from Daniel's world. The process took time, careful planning, legal precision, but eventually it was done. A structure built not for today, but for the future, one that held what mattered most, one that no one could touch. Not Daniel, not creditors, not anyone who came looking for what would soon be missing. Lena didn't tell anyone about it. She didn't need to. Some things were safer when they existed quietly. The third step was documentation, and this she approached with absolute precision. Every file she had uncovered, she copied. Every transaction, she recorded. Every hidden detail, she preserved. But she didn't keep everything in one place. That would have been careless. Instead, she created layers, some documents stored far from the house, some secured in places Daniel had never accessed, some kept close, but hidden well enough to disappear in plain sight. Because if Daniel ever suspected, if he ever started looking, Lena needed to be sure he would find nothing, or at least nothing important. And then came the hardest part, waiting. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months, and through it all, Lena remained exactly who Daniel believed she was. Supportive, quiet, unaware. She continued managing what needed to be managed, continued maintaining the rhythm of a life that, on the surface, had not changed. She attended events, stood beside him when necessary, smiled when expected, and watched. Always watched, because the deeper Daniel sank into the illusion he had created, the less careful he became. Expenses grew. Decisions became faster. Risk replaced caution. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the cracks widened. But Daniel didn't see them, because people rarely see the things they don't want to acknowledge, especially when everything around them still looks like success. Years passed. 3 to be exact. 3 years of silence. 3 years of preparation. 3 years of watching a structure grow weaker while the person inside it grew more confident. And Lena never once interfered. Because she didn't need to. Daniel was doing all the work for her. Digging deeper, building higher, stacking more weight onto something that could not hold. All Lena had to do was let him continue and wait for the moment he would do the one thing she knew he eventually would. He would walk away. Men like Daniel always did. Not when things were falling apart, but when they believed they deserved something better, something new, something easier. And when that moment came, when he asked for everything, he wouldn't be asking for assets. He would be asking for the entire collapse. And Lena Carter would be ready, not to fight him, not to stop him, but to give him exactly what he wanted. Every last piece of it. It happened on an ordinary evening. That was the first thing Lena would remember later. How completely normal everything felt. Right before it wasn't. The kitchen lights were warm, casting a soft glow over the counter as she prepared dinner. The sound of something gently simmering filled the quiet space. Outside, the sky had already darkened, the neighborhood settling into its usual calm. Ethan was upstairs. The house was still. And for a brief moment, everything looked exactly the way it always had. Then the front door opened. Lena didn't turn immediately. She didn't need to. She could recognize Daniel's presence without seeing him. The rhythm of his steps, the way he placed his keys down, the slight pause before he moved further into the house. Lena? His voice cut through the quiet. Flat, controlled, different. She turned slowly, wiping her hands on a towel as she faced him. Daniel stood a few steps away, still in his suit, his expression unreadable. There was no warmth in it, no hesitation. Just decision. I need to talk to you, he said. Lena studied him for a moment, then nodded. Of course. They moved to the dining table. The same place where she had spent countless nights reviewing numbers, building a truth he didn't know she already understood. Daniel didn't sit right away. He stood there as if organizing his thoughts, or perhaps rehearsing something he had already decided. Then finally, "I want a divorce." The words landed cleanly, without emotion, without apology, like a statement in a meeting. Lena didn't react, not outwardly. She simply looked at him, waited, because she knew he wasn't finished. Daniel exhaled slightly, then continued. "I've been thinking about this for a while," he said. "It's the best decision for both of us." For both of us. The phrase sounded almost rehearsed, carefully chosen, empty. Lena lowered her gaze briefly, as if absorbing the weight of it. Inside, there was no shock, no confusion, only confirmation. "It's happening. Right on time." Daniel added, finally pulling out a folder from under his arm and placing it on the table. "I've already had some paperwork prepared." "Of course you have." Lena looked at the folder, then back at him. "What kind of paperwork?" she asked quietly. Daniel opened it, sliding a set of documents toward her. "A proposed settlement." Lena reached for the papers slowly, carefully, like someone who didn't quite know what she was about to see, but she already knew. Every word, every line, every intention behind it. "I'm keeping the house," Daniel said, his tone steady. "The business, the cars, everything tied to the company." He paused, as if expecting resistance, as if preparing for a reaction that never came. Lena's eyes moved across the page. Calm, focused, silent. "You can stay with Ethan," he added. "That makes the most sense." The words hung in the air. "You can stay with Ethan." As if their son were an item to be assigned. As if Lena were being offered something out of convenience. Not love, not responsibility. Convenience. Lena's fingers tightened slightly against the paper, but her face didn't change. She let a few seconds pass, just enough. Then she looked up at him. "You've already decided everything?" she said. It wasn't a question. Daniel nodded. "I think it's better this way. Cleaner." Cleaner? Lena almost smiled. But she didn't. Not yet. Instead, she lowered her gaze again, letting her shoulders relax just slightly, as if something inside her had given way. As if she were overwhelmed. "I see," she said softly. Daniel watched her closely, waiting, measuring. But Lena gave him exactly what he expected to see. No anger, no argument, no fight. Just quiet acceptance. And in that moment, something shifted in Daniel's expression. Not doubt, relief. He had expected this to be harder. Monsieur. But instead, it was easy. Too easy. "Take some time to look it over," he said, pushing the papers slightly closer to her. "We can move quickly if we both cooperate." Cooperate. Lena nodded again. "I understand." And just like that, it was done. At least from his perspective. Daniel stepped back, the tension in his shoulders easing as if a burden had been lifted. Whatever hesitation he might have had before, it was gone now, because Lena hadn't resisted. She hadn't questioned. She hadn't fought. Exactly what he wanted. Exactly what he needed. "Good," he said quietly. "That's good." He turned and walked away. Upstairs. Leaving her alone at the table, the papers still in her hands. The room still wrapped in that same soft, quiet light. For a long moment, Lena didn't move. Then slowly, she placed the documents flat against the table. Her fingers rested lightly on the edges, her expression calm, composed. And then she exhaled, not in defeat, not in sadness, but in recognition, because everything she had been waiting for had finally arrived. Daniel Brooks had made his move. And just like she had known he would, he had asked for everything. The house, the business, the life he believed he had built. He thought he was taking control, claiming what was his, securing his future. But what he didn't understand, what he couldn't see, was that he had just done exactly what Lena needed him to do. He had stepped forward willingly, reached out confidently, and taken hold of something that was already collapsing. Lena leaned back slightly in her chair. The faintest hint of a smile touched her lips. Not visible, not obvious, but real. Because the hardest part was over. She didn't need to convince him. She didn't need to fight him. All she had to do now was let him win. The change was immediate, not gradual, not subtle. The moment Daniel made his decision, everything shifted. Within days, the house no longer felt like Lena's. It wasn't anything he said directly. It was how he acted, how he moved through the space as if ownership had already been transferred, as if the outcome was no longer a question, but a certainty. Lena noticed it in the smallest ways, her things slowly being pushed aside, her space becoming smaller, her presence less relevant. It didn't take long before Daniel made it explicit. "I think it would be better if you moved into the guest room," he said one evening, his tone casual, almost reasonable. "Just until everything is finalized." "Just until." Lena looked at him, then nodded. "Of course." No argument, no resistance. Exactly what he expected, exactly what he needed. The guest room was smaller, colder, temporary. It felt less like a space to live in and more like a place to wait. But Lena didn't complain, because this was part of it. Every step, every moment, every shift in power, it was all moving exactly where she needed it to go. Then came the next change. And this one, Daniel didn't even try to hide. It started with a sound. Laughter. Light. Unfamiliar. Lena was in the kitchen when she heard it for the first time. A woman's voice. Bright. Carefree. Too comfortable. The front door opened and Daniel walked in. Not alone. "Lena," he said, as if this were normal. "This is Chloe." The woman stepped forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You must be Lena," she said. "I've heard so much about you." Lena held her gaze for a brief second, then nodded politely. "Welcome." And that was it. No confrontation. No scene. Just quiet acceptance. But inside, something settled. Not anger. Not jealousy. Certainty. So this is how far he's gone. Chloe didn't visit once. She stayed. At first, it was evenings. Then entire days. Soon, she moved through the house like she belonged there, sitting on the couch Lena had chosen, using the kitchen Lena had organized, even wearing things that didn't belong to her. Small details, but intentional. Territorial. Daniel didn't stop it. He encouraged it. He watched it happen and said nothing, because to him, Lena was already gone. If that wasn't enough, Margaret Brooks made sure to complete the picture. She arrived one afternoon without notice, elegant, composed, and carrying the same quiet judgment she had always held. "I thought I'd come help," she said, stepping inside as if she had every right to be there. "Help!" Lena almost found the word amusing. Margaret didn't waste time. She walked through the house slowly, observing everything with sharp, assessing eyes. Then she turned to Lena. "You should have done more," she said calmly. "Men don't leave without a reason." The words landed exactly as intended. Cold, precise, dismissive. Lena didn't respond, because there was nothing to say. Margaret didn't want a conversation. She wanted confirmation that Lena had failed, that Daniel was justified, that everything unfolding was deserved. But the worst part wasn't Daniel. It wasn't Chloe. It wasn't even Margaret. It was Sophie. Sophie Lane had been Lena's closest friend for years. The one person she thought would never stand on the other side. At first, Sophie was supportive, always checking in, always listening, always asking questions. "How are you holding up? What are you planning to do? Are you going to fight him?" Lena answered carefully. Vaguely, just enough. And then she started noticing things. Daniel referencing conversations she had never had with him. Comments about decisions she had only mentioned once. To Sophie. Patterns. Again. Always patterns. Lena didn't confront her. She didn't need to. Because once you see the pattern, the truth reveals itself. Sophie wasn't just listening. She was reporting. Every word, every plan, every weakness Lena allowed her to see. All of it. Going straight back to Daniel. Lena adjusted instantly. What she shared changed. What she showed shifted. What Sophie believed became something else entirely. Because if Sophie wanted to play that role, then Lena would let her. But on Lena's terms. Through all of it, there was one person who saw everything. Ethan. He didn't say much. Didn't ask questions. But he watched. His father. The new woman. The tension. The silence. And slowly, something in him began to change. Not anger. Not yet. Distance. Confusion. A quiet uncertainty about what was real and what wasn't. And that was the only part Lena couldn't ignore. Because she could lose the house. She could lose the money. She could lose everything Daniel thought mattered. But watching her son begin to doubt her, that was something else entirely. Something deeper. Something sharper. But even then, even with everything collapsing around her, Lena didn't react. She didn't fight. She didn't break. Because all of this, was exactly what Daniel needed to believe. That she was weak. That she was finished. That she had already lost. And the more he believed it, the less careful he became. The more he revealed, the deeper he stepped into something he didn't understand. Lena stood in the kitchen that night, the house no longer feeling like hers, voices echoing faintly from another room. And for a moment, she closed her eyes, not in defeat, but in focus. Because the humiliation, the betrayal, the silence, none of it was the end. It was the setup. And Daniel Brooks had no idea how close he was to the fall. By the time Lena met with her lawyer, the story had already been written. At least, that's what everyone believed. A woman left behind. A husband moving on. A life divided. Simple. Predictable. Almost routine. But Lena wasn't there to follow the story. She was there to rewrite the ending. Laura Bennett's office was quiet, precise. Just like the woman herself. Everything about her suggested control. Sharp lines, clean desk, focused eyes that missed nothing. She had already reviewed the basics of Lena's case before the meeting. 15 years of marriage, shared assets, a growing business, a husband demanding full control. Laura leaned back slightly in her chair, studying Lena with professional clarity. "You understand your position, right?" she said. "You're entitled to half of everything. Possibly more, depending on how we approach this." Her tone was direct. Confident. The tone of someone used to winning. Lena met her gaze calmly. "I know." Laura nodded once. "Good. Then we start preparing for negotiation. He's already made an aggressive move. That usually means we push back harder." Push back. Fight. Claim. That was the expected path, the logical one. The one anyone in Lena's position would take. Lena remained silent for a moment. Then, "I don't want to fight." Laura didn't react immediately. She simply looked at Lena as if waiting for the rest of the sentence. It didn't come. "I'm sorry," Laura said finally. "I don't want to fight him," Lena repeated, her voice steady, controlled. "I want this to be simple." There was a pause, long enough for the weight of those words to settle. Laura's expression shifted, not dramatically, but noticeably, from confidence to concern. "Lena," she said carefully, "if you don't push back, you could lose everything." "I know." Lena didn't say it out loud, but the thought was clear. "That's okay," she replied softly. And in that moment, Laura Bennett saw exactly what Daniel had seen. A woman who was giving up. The first mediation session confirmed it. Daniel arrived confident, relaxed, already winning. He barely looked at Lena as he took his seat across the table, his lawyer beside him, documents prepared, posture steady. This was a formality, nothing more. Laura sat next to Lena, composed but alert, still watching closely. Waiting for Lena to change her mind, waiting for her to fight. The mediator began outlining the process. Terms, expectations, structure. And then, it was Lena's turn to speak. The room grew quieter, not tense. Just attentive. Lena folded her hands lightly in front of her, her shoulders slightly lowered, her voice soft, measured. "I just want this to be over," she said. "No anger, no edge, just fatigue. I don't want to make things harder than they already are." Daniel shifted slightly in his chair. Not uncomfortable, relieved. The mediator nodded, making a note. "And what are you requesting in terms of settlement?" he asked. Lena paused. Just long enough. Then, 50,000? The number landed quietly, but the reaction was immediate. Laura turned her head, sharp.
Surprised?
Daniel blinked once, then leaned back slightly, almost amused. 50? The mediator clarified. "Yes," Lena said. "That's enough for me to start over." No mention of the house. No mention of the business. No mention of the years she had invested. Nothing. Just enough. The room shifted.
Not visibly.
But perceptibly. Because this was no longer a negotiation. This was a surrender. Daniel didn't hesitate. Then we agree, he said quickly, before anyone else could speak. Of course you do. Lena lowered her gaze slightly, as if avoiding eye contact. As if this was difficult for her. As if she were choosing the easiest path. Because she didn't have the strength for anything else. Laura leaned slightly closer. Are you sure? She whispered quietly. Lena didn't look at her, just gave the smallest nod. Yes. And just like that, it was decided. After the meeting, Daniel didn't even try to hide his satisfaction. He walked out with ease, confidence restored, victory secured. Everything he had wanted, within reach, because Lena hadn't fought. She hadn't questioned. She hadn't demanded anything. Exactly what he needed, exactly what he expected. But what Daniel didn't understand, what no one in that room understood, was that Lena hadn't given up. She had simplified the game, removed the noise, eliminated the resistance, so that when the final moment came, there would be nothing left to stop him from doing exactly what she needed him to do. Sign. Take everything. Accept all of it. Without hesitation. Without doubt. Without looking closely enough to understand what everything actually meant. That night, Lena sat alone in her small room, the house quiet around her. The same walls, the same ceiling, but everything felt different now. Not because she had lost, but because the path ahead was clear. Daniel believed he had already won, and that belief was the most dangerous mistake he could make. Lena leaned back slightly, her expression calm, steady. The performance had begun, and she would play her role perfectly until the very end. By the time the final documents were prepared, everything looked clean, structured, orderly. Exactly the way legal agreements were meant to appear. There were no dramatic clauses, no obvious traps, no lines that would immediately raise suspicion. Just pages of carefully written terms outlining what Daniel had asked for and what Lena had agreed to give. The house, the business, the vehicles, everything tied to the life they had built together. Transferred, consolidated, finalized. On the surface, it was exactly what Daniel wanted. But beneath that surface, there was something else, something quiet, something precise, something waiting. Laura Bennett reviewed the documents one last time, her expression unreadable as her eyes moved across each page. Everything was in place, every detail accounted for, every number verified. When she finished, she closed the folder slowly. You understand what happens once he signs this, she said, looking at Lena. Lena nodded. Yes, no hesitation, no doubt. Laura studied her for a moment longer, then gave a small nod of her own. Good, because from this point forward, there would be no going back. On the other side, things were moving faster. Daniel wanted this done. Quickly, cleanly, without delay. Not because he was cautious, but because he was confident. Too confident. Richard Cole, his lawyer, didn't share that confidence. He had seen enough cases to recognize when something felt incomplete. Not wrong, just unchecked. Daniel, he said during one of their final meetings, I strongly recommend we run a full financial review before signing. Daniel didn't look up from his phone. We've already gone over everything, he replied. Yes, Richard said carefully. But a formal audit would confirm the actual value of what you're taking. It's standard in cases like this. Standard, reasonable, smart. Daniel finally looked up and shook his head. I built this, he said. I know what it's worth. Richard didn't respond immediately, because experience had already told him. This wasn't about information. It was about ego. I understand, he said. But there are always details, liabilities, obligations that aren't immediately visible. It's better to verify now than deal with surprises later. Daniel leaned back in his chair, impatience flickering across his expression. There won't be any surprises, he said. We're not dragging this out. Not dragging it out. Richard nodded slowly, then reached into his folder and pulled out a single document. If you're declining the audit, he said, sliding it across the desk, I need you to sign this. Daniel glanced at it briefly, What is it? A waiver, Richard explained. It confirms that I advised you to conduct a full financial review and that you chose not to proceed. Daniel didn't read it, didn't ask questions, didn't hesitate. He picked up the pen and signed. That was the moment the trap closed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. In the days leading up to the final hearing, everything moved exactly as expected. Schedules were confirmed, documents finalized, signatures prepared. Daniel grew more relaxed with each passing day, more open, more careless. He spoke about the future again, plans, ideas, next steps, a life he believed he was stepping into. Unburdened, upgraded, secure. Lena listened when necessary, nodded when expected, said very little, because every word she didn't say was another step forward. Sophie continued to call, still asking questions, still pretending concern. "How are you holding up?" she asked one evening. Lena let her voice soften slightly. "I just want it to be over," she said. And within hours, Daniel knew. Lena didn't need proof anymore. She understood the pattern. So she gave Sophie exactly what she needed to hear, exactly what Daniel needed to believe. That Lena was done, that she had no fight left, that the outcome was already decided. Even Ethan had started noticing things, small contradictions, moments that didn't align. But Lena didn't explain. Not yet. Because some truths were stronger when discovered, not told. The night before the hearing, the house was quiet. Still, unchanged on the surface, but beneath it, everything was already set in motion. Lena stood by the window of the small room she'd been living in, looking out at the dim street beyond. 3 years. That's how long it had taken. 3 years of watching, preparing, waiting. Not for revenge, not for justice, but for the right moment. And now, it had arrived. Tomorrow, Daniel would walk into that courtroom believing he was finishing something. Closing a chapter. Securing everything he had worked for. He would sign without hesitation, without doubt, without understanding. Because, from his perspective, there was nothing left to question. Lena turned away from the window slowly, her expression calm, focused. Final! Because what Daniel didn't realize, what he couldn't see, was that the moment he signed those documents, he wouldn't just be taking control. He would be accepting everything attached to it. Every obligation, every hidden weight, every piece of a structure already collapsing. And once it was his, there would be no separation, no reversal, no escape. Lena sat down quietly, her hands resting in her lap. For the first time in years, she felt something close to certainty. Not hope, not fear, just clarity. Because the game was no longer being built. It was about to be finished. And Daniel Brooks was walking into the final move completely unaware. The courtroom was quieter than Lena expected. Not silent, but controlled, measured. The kind of quiet that comes from routine, not tension. For everyone else, this was just another case. Another agreement, another ending. But for Lena, this was the moment everything converged. 3 years of patience. 3 years of preparation, 3 years of silence, all leading here. Daniel arrived early. Of course he did. He stood near the front, speaking with his lawyer, posture relaxed, expression confident. His suit was perfectly tailored, his movements steady. He looked like a man closing a successful deal, not someone walking into a collapse. Lena entered a few minutes later, simple dress, no jewelry, nothing that drew attention. She moved quietly, taking her place beside Laura Bennett without a word. From across the room, Daniel glanced at her briefly. There was no hostility in his expression, no tension, just something close to indifference, as if she were already part of the past. The judge entered. Everyone stood, then sat. The process began. Names were called, documents referenced, terms confirmed. Routine, predictable, controlled. "Mr. Brooks," the judge said, looking down at the file, "you are accepting full ownership of the marital assets, including the residence, business interests, and associated properties. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Daniel replied without hesitation. Clear, confident, certain. The judge nodded, then turned her attention slightly. "And Mrs. Carter," she said, "you are relinquishing your claim to these assets in exchange for the agreed settlement?" Lena's voice was soft. "Yes, Your Honor." No resistance, no doubt. Exactly what it looked like. The documents were distributed, page after page, signatures required in precise places. Everything moving forward as expected. Daniel picked up the pen. Ready. Eager. He didn't read. Didn't need to. In his mind, the outcome had already been decided. This was just confirmation. Across the table, Laura remained still, watching, waiting. Richard Cole, however, paused. His hand hovered slightly over the final section of the documents. A detail, a line, something that had been there the entire time, but now felt heavier, more significant. He flipped back a page, then forward again. His expression changed, subtle, but unmistakable. He leaned slightly toward Daniel. Sir, he said quietly. Daniel didn't look up. Not now, he replied, already signing one of the pages. Sir, Richard repeated, more firmly this time. We need to review this section. That got his attention. Daniel glanced over. What is it? Richard tapped the document lightly. The liability disclosure. Daniel frowned slightly. What about it? Richard lowered his voice further. You're assuming all financial obligations tied to these assets. Daniel's expression didn't change. Not yet. That's normal, he said. It is, Richard replied carefully. But you need to look at the numbers. For the first time, Daniel actually looked down. Really looked. His eyes moved across the page. Once, then again, slower. The shift was almost immediate. The confidence in his posture faltered. His hand tightened around the pen. What is this? He said under his breath. Richard didn't answer. He didn't need to. The numbers were right there. Clear. Unavoidable. Daniel flipped the page, then another. His movements sharper now, faster, less controlled. The room around him remained quiet, unchanged, but his world had already started to move. Sir, Richard said, barely above a whisper. These are the total obligations, mortgages, business liabilities, outstanding debts, everything connected to what you're taking. Daniel looked up, not at the judge, not at his lawyer, at Lena. For the first time, there was something in his expression that hadn't been there before. Confusion. Then, realization. This isn't right, Daniel said suddenly, his voice louder now. The room shifted, subtly. The judge looked up. Mr. Brooks, she said. These numbers. Daniel gestured at the papers, his voice tightening. This isn't what I agreed to. The judge's expression remained neutral. These are the documented financial obligations tied to the assets you are accepting, she said. They have been disclosed in the agreement. Daniel shook his head. No, this isn't correct. There has to be a mistake. Richard remained still. Because there wasn't. You signed a waiver declining a financial review, the judge continued calmly. You confirmed your understanding of the agreement. Daniel's breathing had changed now. Faster, less controlled. I didn't, he started, then stopped. Because he had. He had signed. Without reading, without questioning, without verifying. The silence in the room deepened. But this time, it wasn't routine. It was weight. Daniel turned back to Lena. You knew, he said, his voice lower now. Not a question. A realization. Lena met his gaze. Calm. Steady. Unmoved. I handled the numbers, she said quietly. That was all. No accusation. No explanation. Just truth. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, the papers still in his hands. Everything he had believed, everything he had assumed, everything he had built his confidence on, was unraveling right there, in front of him. I want to withdraw, he said suddenly, turning back to the judge. This agreement, this isn't what I understood. The judge's response was immediate. You were represented by counsel, she said. You declined additional review. You signed the agreement voluntarily. A pause. Then, the agreement stands. And just like that, it was over. Not gradually, not negotiably, completely. Daniel didn't move, didn't speak, didn't react, because there was nothing left to say. Lena stood slowly, composed, calm, finished. She gathered her things, turning toward the exit, then paused. just for a moment, and looked at him one last time. "You asked for everything," she said quietly. "A beat." "I gave it to you." Then she walked away, and behind her, Daniel Brooks sat in silence, holding the weight of everything he had just taken. The silence after the courtroom felt different. Not heavy, not uncertain, just final. Lena stepped outside into the open air, the faint warmth of the day settling gently around her. For a moment, she simply stood there, letting the stillness replace everything that had come before. 15 years, 3 years of waiting. And now, nothing left to hold. Behind her, the doors remained closed, but the consequences inside had already begun. At first, it was quiet, almost invisible, the kind of unraveling that doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself, one piece at a time. Within days, things started shifting for Daniel. Not dramatically, not yet, but enough. Calls that weren't returned, messages that didn't get answered as quickly, numbers that didn't quite line up the way they used to. At first, he told himself it was temporary. A delay, a minor complication, something he could manage, because that's what he had always believed. That control was something he possessed. But control only works when the foundation holds. And his didn't. The first real crack appeared sooner than expected. Chloe left. Not loudly, not emotionally, just gone. A short message. No explanation beyond what was necessary. "This isn't what I thought it was." And just like that, the illusion disappeared. Because Chloe hadn't been there for struggle. She had been there for the image. And the image was gone. The house followed. The place that had once stood as proof of everything Daniel believed he had built became something else entirely. Numbers caught up. Payments surfaced. Obligations demanded attention. And for the first time, the weight became visible. Too much. Too fast. Too real. Attempts were made. Calls placed. Options considered. But when something is built beyond its limits, there are no easy solutions. Only consequences. The business didn't collapse in a single moment. It declined. Steadily. Quietly. Like something running out of time. Opportunities disappeared. Confidence faded. And without the structure Lena had once maintained, everything that had seemed controlled wasn't. Weeks turned into months. And eventually, the reality Daniel had refused to see became unavoidable. But Lena didn't watch it happen. Not directly. She didn't follow the details. Didn't track the outcomes. Didn't need to. Because the moment had already passed. The result had already been decided. Her life, meanwhile, moved forward. Not quickly. Not dramatically. But steadily. The apartment she now lived in was smaller. Simpler. Nothing like the house she had left behind. But every part of it was hers. Every choice. Every detail. Every quiet moment. Ethan adjusted slowly. At first, there had been distance. Confusion. A quiet uncertainty that had lingered after everything changed. But time revealed what explanations couldn't. Patterns. Truth. Consistency. He saw what remained. Who remained. And what never shifted. And eventually, that was enough. One evening, as they sat together in the small living room, Ethan looked at her with a kind of clarity that hadn't been there before. "You knew, didn't you?" he asked. Lena didn't answer immediately. Then she nodded. "I needed to make sure you were safe," she said. That was all. No details, no explanations, just the truth that mattered. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then he leaned closer and hugged her. Not out of habit, not out of obligation, but understanding. The money Lena had protected remained untouched.
Secure.
Untouchable. A future built quietly long before it was needed. Not for survival, but for stability, for choice, for freedom. And Lena, for the first time in years, began building something of her own. Not out of necessity, but intention. Small steps, simple beginnings, work that reflected her, not someone else's vision. Not someone else's ambition. Just hers. One afternoon, months later, there was a knock at her door. Unexpected. Unplanned. Lena opened it and saw Daniel. He looked different. Not just tired, but diminished. As if something essential had been stripped away. "I didn't know it was this bad," he said quietly. No anger. No accusation. Just regret. Lena listened. calm, unmoved. "We can fix this," he added. "Maybe we can—" No, the word was soft, but absolute. Daniel stopped. "I gave you what you asked for," Lena said. A pause. "And I kept what mattered." There was nothing left to say after that. She closed the door, gently, without hesitation. That night, Lena sat by the window, the quiet of her space wrapping around her like something familiar. There was no victory in the way people imagined, no celebration, no satisfaction in someone else's fall, just peace, the kind that comes when nothing is uncertain anymore, when nothing is being taken from you, when nothing is being hidden. 15 years had ended, not with a fight, not with a loss, but with a choice, one she had made long before anyone else realized the game had even begun. And now, for the first time, Lena Carter wasn't surviving a life. She was living one on her own terms, completely, and finally free.